A lot of guys really want to get a little bit more understanding on is timing Gen 5 motors and knock sensors, especially knock sensors.
We'll just go over every column.
Now, a lot of you guys that have come from Gen 4s, a lot of this stuff is going to literally carry over and it's going to look the exact same. And truthfully, LT1s time very similar. If you guys have ever tuned, say, LS3 cars or LS7 cars, the timing numbers don't really change that much on an LT1. So on the, good 93 octane, we'll typically target this. And again, it usually depends on the cam, it usually depends on the heads, the compression, but most of your street strip applications with moderate camshafts, they're usually going to be in the neighborhood of 21 to 23 degrees of peak timing advance. It's always harder to build one of these files on the fly. But there's a couple things that I want to touch on before you really, well. So one of the things that you'll notice with Gen 5s, especially in these lower cylinder air mass numbers for stock camshafts, actually, can you just hit the back button a few times? You see how we got like 40 degrees of timing in here? It's fairly high cruising spark. It's obviously for fuel economy and efficiency. When we start putting bigger camshafts in these cars, one of the key pieces that we found to keep these cars driving smooth with a big aftermarket camshaft is, what do we typically need to do with cruising timing?
Dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, why?
Everyone's bucking.
Yeah, because you're basically increasing torque per se with more timing advance, right? So, but also, what is the other key element that we've mentioned before as far as
Fuel economy.
what's that? Well, do you want large abrupt changes in timing tables? No.
Because then you don't feel it.
So one of the small tricks that we like to do on Gen 5s is we'll set a lot of our cruising areas to roughly the same number in here. 35 is a good number that I've found for a lot of heads cam cars. And what I'm trying to aim for is as I'm going down the road, I don't have fluctuations in my timing advance. Those fluctuations, the bigger the cam, the worse that buck starts to feel. So I want a nice smooth transition. Like if I start applying throttle, I want the timing to be retarded, obviously, but if I can keep the timing stable, in our cruising ranges, and anywhere from 32 to 38 degrees, depending on the size of the cam, but that 35 number is kind of what we found to retain good fuel economy for a lot of cars, even Z06s. That will retain great drivability, but also still keep the fuel economy too.
And this file's not too bad, but you're going to run into trucks, Gen 5 trucks that have 50s in here, high 40s.
I think even Z06s do.
Yeah, you've got, and it's not even near this clean. This was a pretty easy sweep, but we get into some other files and you'll see that it's a mess.
But before he goes further, let's look at this in 3D. Does this timing table look? Do you guys see any problems in this timing table from the factory? It's pretty rough and abrupt, right? Especially when we get into these higher cylinder air masses. I'm assuming everybody in here understands what cylinder air mass is, right? Got a decent idea? So cylinder air mass is basically engine load. But you see these big pockets here. So what the OE manufacturer does is they use a lot of modifiers to control timing advance. And the problem with this is, our objective is to make this our primary source of timing advance. We want to, if we're going to make changes to timing, we want to do it in here versus the 10 other modifiers that GM uses from the factory. And that's what he was kind of getting into when he started building a timing table here. So, anybody want to also take a stab before we build this? What should a timing table be a representation of when you're on the dyno? I like that. The timing table will usually be an inverse of your torque curve. So where should the least amount of timing at wide open throttle be?
Peak torque.
Bingo. I'm loving it. So the way we'll typically build one of these files is when we put a bigger aftermarket camshaft in one of these, where does peak torque shift? from a stock cam.
All right.
Shifts to the right, higher RPM, right? So he's going to quickly build one on the fly, just kind of showing you, how we will usually set up a base. You can see from the factory, we've got a lot of negative numbers in here. We'll usually put a lot of the negatives more towards positive. Now that was a kind of a quick rough draft here, but we would probably add a little bit more in here. But again, it's harder to do these live and in 30 seconds versus when you're actually spending some time in the car. But what he basically did is, you saw the factory had kind of a good bit of timing coming into the pool. It had 23, 24 degrees, which is about right. But what we did is we actually built kind of a trough right about that 5,000, 4,500, 5,000, where we goes from 24 to 23 degrees down to about 21. That's about where peak torque's likely going to be. And we'll obviously showcase this on the dyno. But that's usually how we'll kind of set these timing tables up for naturally aspirated vehicles.
This one is a bit exaggerated.
Yeah, that's a little exaggerated. It's a bit of a trough in there. And then obviously once we're on the dyno making pulls, if it's not knocking in that peak torque area, we might try to raise that to see if we can pick up a little torque in there. But 20, 23, 20, 22, 24 degrees is about a good number where a lot of these heads cams, 6 gens, are going to end up in the timing department. So is this timing table going to drastically change if we add, say, a Magnuson 2650? Where do you think, how do you think that would get shaped up if we start doing positive displacement?
It's not as aggressive as a ramp in.
Yeah, you're going to have to really ramp it in a lot slower because peak torque is where?
Lower.
Yeah, as soon as you smack the throttle, right, you're going to have a metric ton of cylinder pressure down low. So that ramp would be significantly lower down here. And what do you think about our peak timing? Is that going to be drastically lowered on pump gas?